I'd like to follow up on some questions that Senator Gordon asked earlier. He pointed out that we're not that bad at following up on the last problem, on trying to solve the last problem. And as I appreciate your testimony and Jane Garvey's testimony, the FAA security operation relied pretty heavily on these red teams. And as I understand your testimony, the red teams' job under statute was to determine the effectiveness and the vulnerabilities of the systems. Now, the red teams can test known vulnerabilities like screening or our doors closed, go through a list and just probe the list of known vulnerabilities. But it seems to me the best test, the best and most effective uses of a red team are testing unknown vulnerabilities. Now, to do that, you have to have intelligence or imagination. You have to have some ability to creatively assess what your enemies might be doing so that you can essentially put yourself in their shoes. You can read novels. Not a bad way, actually, to imagine what your enemies might be thinking. Or instead of waiting for the intelligence community to feed you the list of items that Congressman Romer read, you on the red team or you in security can pulse the system and say, what have you got out there that we ought to be thinking about? And my question to you is, did you on the red team or did anyone in the FAA security operation affirmatively go to the intelligence community and say, let us imagine what the next threat might be, what might that be?
No. And the reason for that is aviation security, under the whole guise of the Homeland Security responsibility, aviation security is probably the easiest system out of all this to protect. And you don't have to go into using all kind of imagination to figure out how to beat the system. There are basically two threats against aviation, and that's a hijacking or a bombing. And all you have to do is focus on those two issues: how to minimize a hijacking and how to minimize a bombing.
Well,
I mean, there's other issues like a rocket.
it does seem to me you would defend, and we have heard that you would defend against a hijacking that is not designed to land the plane safely and get some ransom or other action, differently than you would defend against a hijacking designed to fly the plane into a building and kill the hijackers and everyone else. That we've seen that the defensive measures would indeed be different. So if you were to imagine the latter situation as opposed to the former, you might probe the system differently, wouldn't you?
No, there really, from a security point of view, there is no difference between defending against a hijacker that wants to do a September 11th thing or a hijacker that wants to go to Miami. The key word is you're defending against a hijacking and you worry about his motivations later. Now, there are other in-flight procedures that they can use regarding that type of stuff, but as far as keeping a hijacker off a plane and keeping the weapons off a plane, there's no difference between how you would handle either situation.
Well, that's if you define defending it as keeping the weapons off the plane. There are other lines of defense if you failed in that first one, which you would put in place, like barring the doors and having redundant systems for alerting that a hijacking has taken place, that you might implement if you thought that the threat was different. And I'm asking whether anyone in the FAA security chain tried to imagine a different scenario than the one we had previously faced.
Not that I'm aware of, but I still say that from a purely security point of view, whether a person's hijacking a plane, you know, some nutcase that wants to go to Miami or Las Vegas, there's no difference between providing security to deter that person as opposed to providing security against professional terrorists that want to crash a plane into a building. The key word is the basic procedures are the same. You can have heightened procedures, but the basic procedures are the same as far as deterring either one of those type of hijackings. There are only two threats: it's hijackings or bombings.
Well, we may, I think that as a baseline, that might be correct. I don't agree that there's nothing further that you can do once you imagine the threat differently than it has been imagined in the past.